Elena Moore was not the kind of person anyone noticed right away. In the crowded hallway of the small-town music academy, she often slipped past like a shadow. Polite, quiet, invisible. She always arrived on time, carrying a neat folder of sheet music, her step soft on the polished wooden floors. While others laughed, argued, or boasted about their practice hours, Elena simply smiled faintly and went straight to her seat in the back corner of the classroom. No one really knew much about her. She didn't talk about her life, her past, or her goals. Some students guessed she was a beginner who had joined the academy late in life. Others thought she was just trying to learn for fun, maybe as a hobby. Even her teachers didn't ask many questions. After all, she never caused trouble, never missed a class, and never spoke out of turn. To them, she was the definition of an obedient, modest student. Every morning, Elena listened carefully as the instructor explained scales, arpeggios, and chord progressions. She wrote down every word in her small notebook, her handwriting tiny and perfect. When it came time for students to demonstrate their progress, she would quietly shake her head. Maybe next time, she'd whisper, her eyes lowered. The teachers didn't push too hard. They assumed she was shy and perhaps a little afraid of making mistakes in front of others. But something about her calmness puzzled them. Even when others mocked her or laughed at her hesitation, she never looked angry or embarrassed. It was as if she knew something they didn't, and she was content to keep it to herself. When the class grew noisy with chatter and off-key practice notes, she simply sat still, reading her music sheets like they were stories only she could understand. Sometimes, while waiting for class to start, Elena would rest her hands on the edge of her desk. Her fingers were long and elegant, shaped by years of practice, and though no one noticed, her touch seemed instinctively delicate, like that of someone who had spent a lifetime in front of piano keys. But no one at the academy had ever seen her play. To everyone, she was just the quiet woman who smiled politely and kept to herself. One afternoon, during a music theory lesson, the teacher, Mr. Carter, asked the students to identify a chord progression from a famous classical piece. Many struggled, flipping through their notes and whispering guesses. When Mr. Carter's eyes landed on Elena, he said gently, "Miss Moore, would you like to try?" She hesitated, then softly replied, "It's from Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, sir." The room fell silent for a moment. She was correct, perfectly correct, and even added, "The modulation happens just before the bridge to create a sense of longing." Her classmates blinked. One muttered, "How does she know that?" Elena simply smiled again, lowered her gaze, and wrote something quietly in her notebook. After class, one of the younger students, Lily, caught up with her in the hallway. "You knew that piece so well," Lily said. "Do you play piano?" Elena paused, thinking for a moment. "A little," she said softly, her voice humble but calm. "Just a little." It was the kind of answer that didn't invite more questions. Lily nodded, though she could tell Elena was hiding something deep and unspoken. Despite her silence, Elena had a presence that was strangely comforting. When she walked into a room, conversation softened. Her kindness was quiet but powerful. Once she stayed after class to help another student struggling with sight reading. She never made him feel embarrassed or small. Instead, she guided him patiently, pointing out simple patterns. He later told others, "She explains things like she's been teaching forever." Still, no one connected the dots. To them, Elena was just modest, maybe too modest. Outside the academy, Elena lived alone in a small apartment above a bookstore. In the evenings, the faint glow of her lamp could be seen through the window. Inside, her old grand piano sat against the wall, polished but slightly worn. Dusty music sheets lay stacked nearby, many of them faded from years of use. She often sat down at night, not to practice for anyone, but to remember. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, playing melodies that seemed to carry both sadness and peace. Sometimes she would stop suddenly, close her eyes, and whisper, "Not tonight," as if she were talking to a ghost. Back at the academy, no one could have guessed that Elena's silence came not from fear, but from history. Once upon a time, she had played before hundreds of people in grand concert halls. But that was long ago, before tragedy and loss had taken her confidence away. Now she hid that part of herself behind politeness and humility, as if it belonged to another lifetime. In class, Mr. Carter occasionally wondered why such a quiet woman showed such dedication. He often said to his colleagues, "She's either a perfectionist or someone with a secret." They laughed it off, not realizing how close he was to the truth. As weeks passed, a recital was announced. Every student had to perform a piano piece. Excitement filled the classrooms, but for Elena, it felt like a storm gathering quietly. She tried to avoid attention, hoping someone would forget to add her name to the list. But fate, as always, had other plans. At this stage, no one, not even Elena, knew that this simple recital would change everything. The quiet student who blended into the background would soon become the center of a story no one at the academy would ever forget. The announcement came on a cold Monday morning. Mr. Carter walked into the classroom, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone," he said cheerfully. "The end-of-term recital is in 3 weeks. Every student will perform one piano piece in front of the faculty and guests." A wave of excitement spread through the room, except for one person. Elena Moore's pencil froze mid-note. Her heart gave a tiny jump, the kind you feel when something you've been avoiding finally catches up with you. The recital was no small event. It was the Academy's tradition, a way for students to show their progress and for teachers to show off their best pupils. Parents, guests, and even local reporters often attended. To the Academy, it was pride. To Elena, it was panic. After class, while everyone was choosing songs and chatting loudly, Elena stayed seated, quietly staring at her open notebook. Mr. Carter noticed her and walked over. "Miss Moore," he said kindly. "You'll be performing too, of course." Elena smiled nervously. "Sir, I don't think I'm ready," she murmured. "Nonsense," he replied, patting her shoulder. "You've been a model student. It's time to show what you've learned." She hesitated. "Could I maybe play something simple? Something short?" But before she could finish, another teacher, Mrs. Hughes, joined in. "Oh, come now," she said in her usual sharp tone. "Elena's been hiding in the back of the room all term. Let's give her something that will challenge her." The two teachers exchanged a glance that made Elena's stomach sink. Mrs. Hughes smiled tightly. "How about Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor?" Mr. Carter raised his brows. "That's a bold choice." "It will push her limits," Mrs. Hughes said. "Either she'll rise to it or she'll learn humility from the experience." Elena's eyes widened. That piece, difficult even for advanced pianists, was full of thunderous chords, rapid shifts, and emotional weight. "It wasn't a song you learned in 3 weeks. It was one you survived. I'm not sure I can," she began softly. But Mrs. Hughes was already scribbling her name on the recital list. "You'll manage," she said briskly. "Effort builds character." The bell rang and the room buzzed with conversation again. Elena sat frozen, her pulse quickening as she stared at the words beside her name. Elena Moore, Rachmaninoff, Prelude in G minor. As the students left the room, some whispered to each other. "They gave her that piece?" One girl laughed. "She'll never pull it off." "I didn't even know she could play," another boy said. "Maybe she'll just fake an illness to skip the recital," someone joked. Elena gathered her book silently and walked out, keeping her face calm though her hands trembled slightly. That evening, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the music sheet of the dreaded Rachmaninoff Prelude. She had played it once before, years ago, when her life was full of light and applause. The memories stung now. The page seemed to breathe with ghosts of her past. Her mind wandered back to a different time. The grand concert hall, her younger self standing backstage, her father's proud smile as he whispered, "Play like the world is listening, my star." She had played then with fire, with confidence, with soul. But that was before the accident, before silence took over her life. Now, years later, she sat alone in a small room, the piano keys covered with a thin layer of dust. She lifted the lid slowly, her reflection shining faintly on the black surface. Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure, trembling. She pressed one note, soft, almost hesitant. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Then another note, and another. Slowly, the melody began to take shape, like an old friend returning after years apart. For hours she played, her fingers rediscovering the path they once knew by heart. Each mistake made her flinch, but she continued. The more she played, the more something inside her awoke, something she had locked away long ago. Outside, the city grew quiet. Midnight passed unnoticed. When she finally stopped, tears had gathered in her eyes. Her fingers ached, but her heart felt lighter. She closed the piano lid, It felt lighter. She closed the piano lid and whispered to herself, "I can't hide forever." The next morning at the academy, Elena arrived early. The students were still chatting near the vending machine when she entered the empty practice room. The piano gleamed in the morning light. She placed her sheet music gently on the stand and began again. Her first few notes were uncertain, but within minutes, her touch softened. Her movements became natural, graceful. Her hands flew across the keys with growing confidence. She didn't notice that Mr. Carter had stopped by the door, quietly listening. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to quiet surprise. He could hear the control, the emotion, the precision, the unmistakable skill of someone who had spent years mastering her craft. But he didn't interrupt. He simply smiled faintly and walked away, deciding not to tell anyone what he had heard. When Elena finished, she sighed deeply, feeling both fear and determination. The recital still terrified her, but deep down she knew something had changed. The music she thought she had lost was still there, waiting for her, like an old friend she had been too scared to visit. Later that day, when her classmates asked if she had started practicing, she only smiled and said, "A little." They laughed, not knowing that her little meant hours of rediscovering a buried part of her soul. For the first time in years, Elena felt a spark inside her, fragile but real. She wasn't just a quiet student anymore. She was a woman slowly waking up from silence. The news spread around the academy faster than a rumor ever should. "Elena Moore is playing Rachmaninoff," someone whispered in the hallway. "No way," another replied, laughing. "That piece eats people alive." By lunchtime, everyone knew. Some found it funny, others pitied her. To them, Elena was that quiet woman who barely spoke, the one who never volunteered to play in class. How could she possibly manage one of the most demanding piano pieces ever written? In the cafeteria, small groups of students gossiped between bites of sandwiches and clinking cups. "She's going to embarrass herself," a confident young pianist named Daniel said. "Rachmaninoff isn't for amateurs." Lily, the only one who had ever spoken kindly to Elena, frowned. "Maybe you shouldn't judge her so quickly." Daniel shrugged. "I'm not judging. I'm just saying, if she messes up, it's on her. Nobody forced her." "But they did," Lily said quietly, her voice firm. "The teachers picked the piece for her." Daniel smirked. "Then she should have refused." Lily just shook her head. "You don't understand her." Meanwhile, Elena spent her lunch break alone in the small piano room on the second floor, the one most students avoided because of its slightly squeaky pedals. She liked it there. It was quiet, peaceful. Every day after class, she stayed behind to practice. Her fingers trembled at first, missing notes, hesitating between chords. But she didn't stop. The music flowed slowly, uncertainly, until it began to breathe again, strong, graceful, alive. One evening, while she was deep in practice, Mrs. Hughes happened to walk by. She paused for a second, hearing a faint melody through the door. It was soft but steady, precise. She frowned, surprised, then shook her head. "Probably a recording," she muttered and walked away. The next morning, Daniel and a few classmates decided to peek into her practice session. They cracked open the door quietly. Elena didn't notice them at first. Her back was straight, her eyes closed, her fingers moving with careful grace. But then she stopped suddenly, sensing eyes on her. The boys quickly pretended to be just passing by. Daniel smirked. "You sure you can handle that piece, Elena?" She turned slightly, her expression calm. "I can try," he chuckled. "Try not to break the piano in the process." Elena smiled faintly, not out of amusement but politeness. She said nothing more. When they left, Daniel whispered to his friend, "See? She's terrified." But what he didn't see was that as soon as the door closed, Elena took a deep breath, placed her hands back on the keys, and began again, her playing stronger, louder, more determined. Days passed. The recital was getting closer. Posters went up around the academy. Students practiced in every corner. Scales, runs, warm-ups echoing through the hallways. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, except for Elena's practice room. There, time seemed to slow down. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played to remember, to feel alive again. Sometimes, while playing, she would close her eyes and picture her father standing beside her, smiling, whispering the same words he once told her. "Don't fight the music, Lena. Feel it. Let it carry you." At home, she practiced until her fingers ached. Sometimes she fell asleep at the piano, waking up with her cheek resting against the cool wood. The neighbors who lived below her often paused their TV shows to listen. "Whoever's playing upstairs," one old man told his wife, "sounds like she's pouring her heart into it." But back at the academy, the skepticism only grew. Mr. Carter overheard students whispering, "She'll probably forget half the notes." Mrs. Hughes told a colleague, "She's sweet, but she's in over her head." Even Lily, though she believed in Elena, couldn't help feeling worried. One afternoon, Lily entered the practice room while Elena was playing. The music stopped mid-phrase. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lily said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Elena smiled. "It's all right. Did you need something?" "I just wanted to hear you play," Lily admitted shyly. "You always seem so focused." Elena looked at the piano keys. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" She paused, searching for the right words. "When you love something deeply, it becomes both your comfort and your pain." Lily didn't fully understand, but she felt the weight in Elena's tone. "You'll be amazing," she said softly. Elena smiled again, that same small, gentle smile she always wore. But her eyes said otherwise. As the recital day approached, her confidence grew in secret, while others' doubts grew louder. Some called her brave, others foolish. A few even planned to record her performance for fun. On the final rehearsal day, everyone gathered in the main hall to practice their pieces. When Elena's name was called, a few students exchanged glances, already smirking. She walked to the piano slowly, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. She sat down, adjusted the sheet music, and placed her hands on the keys. For a brief moment, no one breathed. Then music. Deep, rich, powerful. The first few chords struck through the hall like thunder rolling in the distance. Her fingers moved faster, sharper, filled with emotion. The teachers looked up, startled. The whispers stopped. Even Daniel's grin faded. Then, just as suddenly, Elena stopped. Her fingers froze mid-note. She had lost focus for a second. The memory of her father's face flashed in her mind. She stood quickly, apologizing. "I'll be better next time," she said softly, walking off before anyone could react. The hall remained silent. The teachers exchanged puzzled looks. "She almost had it," Mr. Carter whispered. Mrs. Hughes frowned. "Almost isn't enough." But in that short moment, everyone had felt something they couldn't explain. The quiet woman's music had carried power, honesty, and heartbreak. And though she didn't know it yet, that small spark was just the beginning of something extraordinary. That evening, after the rehearsal, Elena didn't go straight home. The other students laughed and chatted as they left the academy, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. But Elena turned the opposite way, toward the dimly lit practice hall at the end of the building. The janitor, Mr. Blake, was sweeping near the doors. He looked up as she passed. "Long day, Miss Moore," he said kindly. Elena smiled. "Just one more hour of practice," he chuckled softly. "You and that piano, I swear it's like it's your best friend." She paused, thinking about it, and nodded. "Maybe it is." She entered the hall and shut the door quietly behind her. The room was dark except for a single lamp near the piano. She turned it on, and a warm glow spilled across the polished floor, reflecting on the shiny black surface of the grand piano. The air was still, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. She took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and sat down. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the world outside disappeared. The first few notes came out hesitant, fragile, like a whisper in an empty church. Then slowly the sound began to grow. Her hands moved with a rhythm that seemed to come from deep inside her, from somewhere older than memory. The melody filled the hall, heavy, beautiful, powerful. If anyone had been listening, they would have heard more than just skill. They would have heard a story, of loss, of love, of a woman rediscovering a part of herself she thought was gone forever. But no one was supposed to hear. Or so she thought. Mr. Blake, who was about to lock up, stopped when the sound reached the hallway. He stood frozen, broom in hand, listening. The music seemed to shimmer through the walls. He slowly opened the door a crack and peeked inside. What he saw made his eyes widen. Elena wasn't just playing. She was living through the music. Her head was slightly tilted, her eyes half closed, her face calm but full of feeling. Every movement of her fingers was precise yet natural, like breathing. The difficult passages, The thunderous left-hand chords, the cascading runs, flowed effortlessly, as if she had been born to play them. When she reached the final section, the room trembled with emotion. The sound rose and fell like waves crashing and retreating. And then silence, waves crashing and retreating. And then silence. Mr. Blake stood there for a moment, unable to speak. He had worked at the academy for 20 years, heard hundreds of students play, but never like this. He closed the door quietly, leaving her alone, and whispered to himself, "She's no student. She's a master." Inside, Elena leaned forward, resting her forehead on her hands. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent, uninvited. She hadn't meant to cry, but the music had pulled too many memories to the surface. She remembered her father's old piano room, the smell of polished wood and sheet music, his laughter as he clapped for her first recital. She remembered the night of the accident, the call that shattered her world. She remembered how she swore she'd never touch a piano again because every note reminded her of him. And now here she was, years later, breaking her own promise, and finding that every note still carried his voice. His pride, his love, she whispered softly. "I miss you, Papa." Her voice trembled, then faded into the empty hall. She closed her eyes for a long moment, listening to the silence. It felt like the world was holding its breath. After a while, she began to play again, not Rachmaninoff this time, but a melody of her own. Gentle, soft, filled with hope, a lullaby of healing. When she finished, she smiled faintly, wiping her tears. "Maybe this is how I say goodbye," she murmured. From that night on, the janitor made it a habit to finish his work slowly, just so he could listen. Every evening, around the same time, music would fill the empty building. Sometimes it was slow and tender, other times fierce and powerful. Each night sounded like a confession, a prayer, and a rebirth all at once. He never told anyone what he heard. It felt like a secret too beautiful to share. Meanwhile, the teachers remained unaware. Mrs. Hughes still complained that Elena was too quiet and lacked stage energy. Mr. Carter defended her gently, saying, "Why, sometimes the quiet ones surprise you." But even he didn't know how true those words were. Outside, winter winds blew softly through the trees, and the town lights shimmered in the distance. Elena walked home each night with her fingers still tingling from the music, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. At home, she would write a few notes in her old journal. She didn't write about the recital or the gossip. Instead, she wrote small things like, "The music didn't hurt tonight. My hands remembered something new. For the first time, I'm not afraid of the piano." Each line was like a quiet step toward healing. As the recital day drew closer, Elena practiced harder, not out of fear but out of love. Love for her father, for the piano, for the girl she used to be. And though the academy remained unaware, one old janitor and a quiet apartment window became silent witnesses to a miracle. A modest woman reclaiming her lost music. Note by note, night after night, she had no idea that her secret practices were already shaping her destiny, and that soon, her music would no longer stay hidden. The week of the recital arrived, and the academy buzzed with nervous excitement. Posters hung on every wall, and students carried sheet music everywhere. In their bags, in their hands, even tucked under their arms as they walked down the hallways. The sound of piano keys echoed constantly from the practice rooms, a mixture of chaos and brilliance. But among all the noise, Elena stayed calm. She still came early, sat in her favorite quiet room, and practiced alone. Each day, her playing became smoother, more confident. Every note of Rachmaninoff's prelude now felt like a heartbeat, strong, emotional, and alive. On the morning of the full rehearsal, she arrived before anyone else. The auditorium lights were dim, the stage empty except for the grand piano in the center. She placed her hand on its polished surface and whispered softly, "Let's do this." She sat down and began to play. The melody filled the vast room, haunting and powerful. The first notes were bold, echoing off the high ceiling like rolling thunder. The second movement softened, full of sadness and longing. Her hands moved quickly, her body swaying slightly with each phrase. Elena wasn't performing for anyone. She was talking to the piano, telling it everything she had never said aloud. When she finished, the final note lingered in the air. The silence that followed was so deep it felt alive. She smiled faintly to herself, unaware that she was not alone. From the back of the hall, Mr. Carter had been standing quietly, watching. He had come in early to prepare for the day's rehearsal, but had stopped the moment he heard her play. For a few seconds, he couldn't even breathe. He had taught for 20 years, heard dozens of talented students. But this was different. Elena's playing wasn't just perfect. It was human. It had emotion, story, pain, and beauty all woven together. When she turned and noticed him, she jumped slightly. "Oh, I didn't see you there." He smiled gently. "That was extraordinary, Miss Moore." Elena blushed. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just—" "No need to apologize," he said softly. "That was the best I've heard in this hall all week." She looked down, nervous. "It's still not perfect. I make mistakes when I get nervous." He nodded kindly. "Perfection isn't what moves people. Emotion does. And you have that, Elena." For the first time since she joined the academy, someone saw her. Really saw her. Later that day, the rehearsal began. Students took turns performing their assigned pieces. Some played well, others stumbled under pressure. The teachers sat in the front row, making notes, whispering comments to each other. When Elena's name was called, a few students exchanged smirks. "Here comes the disaster," Daniel muttered under his breath. Elena heard him but didn't react. She walked calmly to the stage, her small figure almost fragile under the bright lights. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. The hall went quiet. Then she began to play. The first few bars rang out, clear, bold, and full of emotion. Her fingers danced across the keys, each note precise but effortless. The stormy rhythm of Rachmaninoff's prelude echoed through the hall like a story of heartbreak and power. Mrs. Hughes straightened in her seat. Mr. Carter smiled faintly. Even the students who had mocked her moments ago froze, their expressions changing from boredom to disbelief. As she moved into the softer section, the hall felt like it was breathing with her. Every rise and fall of the melody seemed to pull the audience deeper in. Her face remained calm, her eyes half closed, as if she was somewhere far away playing not for them, but for someone she missed deeply. When she reached the last note, she held it gently, letting it fade into silence. Then she lifted her hands slowly from the keys and looked up. For a moment, no one spoke. Then suddenly applause, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Elena smiled softly, stood, and gave a small bow. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from relief. As she left the stage, Mr. Carter whispered to Mrs. Hughes, "Still think she was a weak choice?" Mrs. Hughes didn't answer. Her eyes followed Elena as she walked off stage, and for once she had nothing to say. Back in the hallway, a few students approached Elena, awkwardly smiling. "Hey," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "That wasn't bad," Elena chuckled softly. "Thank you. It was actually really good," Lily said warmly. "You played like you were telling a story." Elena smiled. "Maybe I was." That night, as she walked home, snow began to fall, light and slow like tiny pieces of music floating down from the sky. She looked up, letting the snow touch her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone hiding from the world. She felt like a pianist again. What she didn't know was that word of her rehearsal was already spreading through the academy. Teachers were whispering, students were curious, and the once invisible woman was suddenly the name on everyone's lips. By the next morning, even Mrs. Hughes stopped her in the hallway and said, "Miss Moore, I misjudged you." Elena smiled kindly. We all do that sometimes. As the recital day approached, she no longer feared the stage. She no longer practiced out of duty, she played out of love. And somewhere deep in her heart, she felt her father's voice again, proud and gentle. "See my star? The world was always meant to hear you." The day of the recital arrived like a dream wrapped in nerves and bright light. The Academy's concert hall was decorated beautifully. Golden curtains, polished floors, rows of neatly arranged chairs. Students whispered anxiously backstage, their sheet music trembling in their hands. Elena Moore stood quietly in the corner, holding her worn notebook. She didn't fidget, didn't pace, and she simply breathed. Her calmness made her seem almost out of place among the nervous chatter and rustling dresses. Lily approached her, smiling softly. "You're not nervous?" Elena returned the smile. "A little," she said. "But I've already played this piece many times alone. Tonight I just have to play it with people listening." Lily nodded. Everyone's talking about you, you know? Elena chuckled gently. I'm used to that. On stage, the recital began. One by one, students performed their chosen pieces, Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven. Some played beautifully. Others stumbled, but the audience clapped for everyone. The atmosphere was warm and forgiving. Then the announcer called, "Next we have Miss Elena Moore performing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor." A hush fell over the room. Even those who had been chatting or scrolling through their phones looked up. They had heard the rumors, the quiet woman with the impossible piece. Elena walked onto the stage with small, steady steps. Her dark blue dress shimmered under the lights. She gave a polite bow, adjusted the piano bench, and took a deep breath. For a moment, she looked out at the audience. The front row was filled with teachers, Mr. Carter smiling kindly, Mrs. Hughes with arms crossed, skeptical as ever. Behind them sat students, parents, and visitors. The hall seemed endless. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note struck like thunder, deep, commanding, full of emotion. The sound spread across the hall, powerful yet graceful. Her fingers moved with perfect rhythm, blending strength and softness in a way that made every listener lean forward. People expected nervousness, hesitation, but there was none. There was only music. Mrs. Hughes's pen fell from her hand. Mr. Carter's eyes glistened with pride. The audience was spellbound. The air vibrated with the sound of Rachmaninoff, bold, stormy, heartbreaking. In that moment, Elena was no longer the quiet woman sitting at the back of the classroom. She was a storyteller. Every phrase spoke of love, loss, and rebirth. Every note carried a piece of her soul. When she reached the middle section, the softer, more emotional part, her movements slowed. Her face softened. She wasn't performing anymore. She was remembering. Her father's smile, the warm light of the old concert hall, the night she promised she'd never play again. All of it flowed through the music. People could feel it. A tear rolled down Lily's cheek in the audience. Even Daniel, who once mocked her, sat frozen, his expression full of disbelief. And then came the final section, fast, fiery, impossible for most pianists. But Elena played it effortlessly. Her hands blurred with speed, yet every note rang clear, controlled, and alive. When the final chord exploded through the hall, silence followed. Not polite silence, breathless silence. The kind that hangs in the air because no one wants to break it. For a few seconds, time stopped. Then, applause. It started slowly from one corner of the hall, then grew, louder and louder until the entire room was standing. The ovation was thunderous. People cheered, shouted, clapped until their hands hurt. Elena stood up, stunned. She had expected polite applause, maybe a few smiles. Not this. Mr. Carter rose to his feet, clapping with a proud smile. Even Mrs. Hughes stood, her usual sternness replaced with awe. She whispered to herself, "She's magnificent." Elena bowed, her heart pounding. The lights seemed brighter, the sound of applause echoing in her ears like waves. For the first time in years, she didn't hide. She didn't shrink. She let herself feel it. The joy, the relief, the peace. Afterward, backstage, people surrounded her. That was unbelievable. Where did you learn to play like that? Were you a professional before? Elena smiled shyly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. I just practiced a lot, she said softly. Mr. Carter stepped forward, his eyes warm. That wasn't practice, Miss Moore, that was mastery. She laughed lightly. Maybe just experience. He nodded knowingly. You've played before, haven't you? Elena hesitated, then said quietly, a long time ago. Before life got in the way. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you for finding your way back. That night, word spread beyond the academy. Videos of her performance were posted online by students in the audience. The comments flooded in. Who is she? This isn't just skill, it's emotion. The modest woman who played Rachmaninoff like she lived it. By the next morning, everyone in town knew her name. The local newspaper wrote, Hidden Virtuoso Stuns Music Academy. Modest student revealed as concert-level pianist. When Elena read it, she smiled, then quietly folded the paper and placed it in her notebook. She didn't care about fame or attention. What mattered was that she had played again, truly played. That night she returned to her piano, the one in her apartment above the bookstore. She opened the window, letting the cool evening air drift in. The city lights glimmered below as she began to play a gentle tune, soft, warm, full of peace. For the first time, her music wasn't filled with grief or regret. It was filled with freedom. Elena Moore, the woman everyone once overlooked, had reminded the world and herself who she truly was, a pianist, a dreamer, and a soul reborn through music. The morning after the recital felt unreal for Elena. When she arrived at the academy, the atmosphere was different. Students who once ignored her now greeted her warmly. Teachers nodded respectfully as she walked by. It felt as if the walls themselves whispered her name. Lily ran up to her, almost breathless. "Elena, you're in the newspaper." Elena blinked, surprised. "What?" Lily opened her phone and showed her a photo. Elena at the piano, head slightly bowed, eyes closed in concentration. The headline read, "The hidden virtuoso, modest student leaves audience speechless." Elena smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Oh dear, I didn't expect this." "You deserve it," Lily said proudly. "Everyone finally knows how amazing you are." By the time she reached her classroom, a small crowd of students had gathered. Daniel, who once laughed at her, stood near the doorway holding a cup of coffee. He looked uncomfortable but sincere. "Hey, I wanted to say sorry," he muttered, "for how I acted before." Elena smiled softly. "It's all right, Daniel. We all learn in different ways." He nodded awkwardly, then said, "You're incredible, you know that?" She chuckled gently. "Thank you." Throughout the day, people came up to her, some asking for advice, others simply to say how much her music had moved them. One student told her, "When you played, I cried. I didn't even know why, but it felt like you were playing something I'd lost too." Those words touched her deeply. For the first time, Elena felt like her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who listened. Later that afternoon, the academy's director called her to his office. The walls were lined with photos of past graduates and famous musicians. The director, an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled warmly as she entered. "Miss Moore," he began, "I must congratulate you. Your performance last night was extraordinary." "Thank you, sir," she replied politely. He leaned forward. "I understand you've had prior training?" Elena hesitated. "Yes, sir. I studied piano professionally when I was younger. I stopped for a long time." The director nodded slowly. "Well, I think it's time you start again. We'd like you to represent the academy at the regional concert next month." Elena's eyes widened. "Me? Represent the academy?" He smiled. "You've earned it. You reminded us what true music sounds like. Honest, emotional, alive." As she left his office, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The quiet woman no one noticed was now being invited to perform publicly again, something she once thought she would never do. That evening, she sat at her piano at home, gazing at the keys. She thought about her father, about how proud he would be. "Looks like I'm not done yet, Papa," she whispered softly. Over the next few weeks, life at the academy changed for her completely. Mrs. Hughes, who had once been her harshest critic, now treated her with a quiet respect. One morning after class, she approached Elena. "Miss Moore," she said in her usual crisp voice, though it sounded gentler than before, "your interpretation of Rachmaninoff was remarkable. I misjudged you." Elena smiled warmly. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that." Mrs. Hughes hesitated, then added, "If you ever decide to teach, I believe you'd make an excellent instructor." Elena's eyes softened. Maybe one day. Her story spread beyond the academy. The local radio invited her for an interview. During the broadcast, the host asked, "How did it feel to return to the piano after so many years?" Elena paused before answering. "It felt like coming home," she said simply. "Music never left me. I just stopped listening for a while." The audience loved her sincerity. People called in to say how her humility and courage had inspired them. One listener said, "I stopped painting after my wife passed away, but hearing your story makes me want to start again." Elena smiled when she heard that message. It made her realize that her second chance wasn't just hers. It gave others hope too. As the regional concert approached, her days were filled with rehearsals and interviews, but she never lost her calm. She still walked through the academy halls with her quiet grace, still smiled politely, still offered to help younger students struggling with their lessons. One afternoon, she found Lily crying in a practice room. "What's wrong?" Elena asked gently. I'm scared, Lily admitted. I keep making mistakes. I'm not good enough. Elena sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. You know, she said softly, I used to believe the same thing. I thought if I wasn't perfect, I shouldn't play at all. But music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Lily looked up, her eyes teary. You really believe that? Elena smiled. I lived it. That evening, as the sun set behind the academy, Elena walked through the courtyard, her reflection glimmering in the glass windows. She could hear faint piano notes from other rooms, students practicing with new energy, new inspiration, and she realized something beautiful. She had become the spark that reignited others' passion. Her story wasn't just about rediscovering music. It was about helping others believe that it's never too late to begin again. At the end of the week, a framed photo appeared on the Academy's Hall of Honor. It was Elena. Mid-performance, her expression calm yet full of emotion. Below it, a simple quote from her interview was engraved. Elena smiled when she heard that message. It made her realize that her second chance wasn't just hers. It gave others hope too. As the regional concert approached, her days were filled with rehearsals and interviews, but she never lost her calm. She still walked through the academy halls with her quiet grace, still smiled politely, still offered to help younger students struggling with their lessons. One afternoon, she found Lily crying in a practice room. What's wrong? Elena asked gently. I'm scared, Lily admitted. I keep making mistakes. I'm not good enough. Elena sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. You know, she said softly, I used to believe the same thing. I thought if I wasn't perfect, I shouldn't play at all. But music isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest. Lily looked up, her eyes teary. You really believe that? Elena smiled. I lived it. That evening, as the sun set behind the academy, Elena walked through the courtyard, her reflection glimmering in the glass windows. She could hear faint piano notes from other rooms, students practicing with new energy, new inspiration, and she realized something beautiful. She had become the spark that reignited others' passion. Her story wasn't just about rediscovering music. It was about helping others believe that it's never too late to begin again. At the end of the week, a framed photo appeared on the Academy's Hall of Honor. It was Elena, mid-performance, her expression calm yet full of emotion. Below it, a simple quote from her interview was engraved. When life takes away your song, wait. One day you'll find the courage to play it again. Elena stood there for a long moment, looking at it quietly. Then she smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Her journey wasn't over. The biggest stage still awaited her, but for now, she was content. The modest woman who once hid in the back of the classroom had become the heart of the academy. The night of the regional concert arrived, colder than usual, the kind of evening that wrapped the city in silver mist and soft wind. The grand concert hall shimmered with golden light, its chandeliers glowing like constellations above a sea of expectant faces. Musicians tuned their instruments backstage, the hum of excitement mixed with nervous laughter and soft whispers. And in the quiet corner of that backstage chaos sat Elena Moore, calm as ever, dressed in a long, elegant black gown. Her hair was pinned neatly, her expression serene. Her fingers rested lightly on her lap, but inside, her heart beat with quiet thunder. This wasn't just another performance. This was her return. Not to fame, not to applause, but to herself. From the stage came the sound of the previous performer finishing, a storm of clapping. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Elena Moore representing the St. Aldan Music Academy, performing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Many already knew her story, the modest woman who had stunned her academy. Journalists sat ready with cameras, music critics scribbled in their notebooks. But Elena didn't care about any of that. As she walked onto the stage, her focus was only on the piano. She bowed gracefully, then sat down. The hall went completely silent. You could hear the faint sound of someone breathing in the front row. Elena placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and whispered softly, "For you, Papa." Then she began. The first notes thundered through the hall, rich, full, commanding. The sound wrapped around the audience like a wave. Her body swayed slightly, her fingers moved like water, fluid, strong, effortless. Every chord carried something deeper than technique. It carried her years of silence, her pain, her love, and the peace she had finally found. The audience could feel it. The music wasn't just being played. It was being lived. Halfway through, she reached the emotional heart of the piece, the section filled with sadness and longing. Her hands softened, her movement slowed. The melody sounded like someone speaking through tears. She felt the presence of her father again, his warmth, his encouragement, his love. She smiled through the ache in her chest. The world around her faded away until it was just her and the piano. As she played the final explosive section, the hall seemed to tremble with sound. Her fingers raced across the keys, flawless, fearless. Every note struck the heart like lightning. And then, the final chord. It rang through the hall and hung in the air for what felt like forever. Then silence. Elena sat still, her fingers resting on the keys, eyes glistening. The entire audience was frozen. Then, as if waking from a spell, they rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. People shouted, clapped, cried. The hall echoed with the sound of admiration and awe. Elena stood, bowed deeply, and for a brief moment lifted her eyes to the ceiling. "Thank you," she whispered. In the front row, Mr. Carter stood clapping proudly. Even Mrs. Hughes had tears in her eyes. Lily was crying openly, whispering, "You did it, Elena." When Elena stepped off the stage, the concert organizer ran to her. "That was unbelievable. The whole hall was in tears," he exclaimed. "You've brought something rare to this place. Honesty." Elena smiled softly. "That's all I ever wanted to play." Outside, after the concert ended, the night air was cool and quiet. Snow had begun to fall again, light, gentle, peaceful. She walked slowly down the steps of the concert hall, still hearing the echo of her music in her mind. Reporters waited nearby, but she waved them off politely. "Tonight isn't about me," she said with a kind smile. "It's about music finding its way home." She walked through the park nearby, her heels crunching softly on the thin layer of snow. In the distance, the lights of the city shimmered like stars reflected on water. When she reached a small bench, she sat down, letting the cool air brush against her cheeks. For a moment, she closed her eyes and listened, not to the noise of the city, but to the silence that now felt peaceful, not lonely. In that silence, she could almost hear her father's voice again. "I'm proud of you, my star." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were warm, full of joy. "I hope you heard me, Papa," she whispered. At that moment, she realized something beautiful. She hadn't just played for him. She had played for everyone who had ever been silenced by life. Everyone who had once given up on their dreams. She had turned her pain into melody, her fear into art, her silence into something that touched hearts. Over the next few weeks, invitations poured in, orchestras, music festivals, interviews. But Elena accepted only a few. She didn't want to chase fame again. She wanted to live quietly, teach others, and share her story with students who thought they weren't good enough. At the academy, she began teaching a small group of beginners. Her classroom was always full of laughter, mistakes, and music. When her students got nervous, she would smile and say, "Don't try to impress, just tell your truth through the keys." Years later, when people spoke of Elena Moore, they didn't call her just a pianist. They called her the woman who played with her soul. And in her modest apartment above the old bookstore, the piano still stood by the window, polished, loved, alive. Every night as the city lights glowed outside, she played softly, her music carrying into the streets below like a lullaby for the world. Because for Elena, redemption wasn't about fame or forgiveness. It was about finding peace in the sound that once broke her and learning to love it again.